The doorbell's sudden ring startled Adrian out of his thoughts. It had been one of those long, quiet afternoons when the house felt too still, the silence almost suffocating. Since James passed, it was these small, unexpected noises that would jar Adrian the most, reminding him of the empty spaces left behind. When he opened the door, he wasn't expecting to see Julian standing there, a hesitant smile on his face, holding a small potted plant that looked as uncertain about its presence as Julian himself. "Hey, Adrian," Julian greeted softly. He looked a little uncomfortable, his hand shifting on the pot as if unsure whether to hand it over or keep holding on to it. I thought I'd stop by, see how you were holding up." Adrian's first instinct was to say he was fine, to brush it off with the same polite detachment he'd used with everyone else. But something about Julian's presence softened him. Julian had been James's best friend, his confidant in ways Adrian didn't fully understand. They had a bond that had always felt impenetrable, a language of shared jokes and secrets that Adrian had witnessed but never been a part of. A small, almost involuntary smile curved Adrian's lips. "Thanks, Julian," he said, stepping aside to let him in. "I wasn't expecting visitors, but it's good to see you." Julian entered the house cautiously, as though afraid he might disturb something fragile. He looked around, taking in the familiar surroundings that were tinged with absence. James's absence. They both stood awkwardly for a moment, the quiet stretching between them, filled with the things neither of them could bring themselves to say. After a few seconds, Adrian gestured to the couch. "Want some coffee?" "Yeah," Julian replied, his smile softening. "Coffee sounds good." As Adrian moved to the kitchen, he felt the weight of Julian's gaze following him. He'd known Julian for years, mostly through James, and yet, without James there, everything felt different, charged with a subtle tension. He prepared the coffee in silence, aware of Julian's presence close by, a reminder of a past that felt so distant now. When he returned with the coffee, Julian had settled onto the couch, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. Adrian handed him a cup, their fingers brushing briefly as Julian took it, and he felt a strange jolt, something he quickly dismissed as nerves. He sat beside Julian, leaving a polite amount of space between them, but the air felt heavy, as if shrinking that distance with an invisible pull. They drank their coffee in silence, each sip punctuated by the sounds of the neighborhood outside, children playing, a dog barking, the hum of a distant lawnmower. It was almost surreal, how normal everything seemed, when his world had been anything but. "I miss him," Julian said suddenly, his voice raw and low. The words hit Adrian like a punch to the gut, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. "Me too," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Julian looked at him, his gaze steady, and for a moment Adrian felt exposed, as though Julian could see through the carefully constructed walls he'd built to protect himself. Julian's eyes were filled with a pain that mirrored his own, a grief that only someone who had loved James in their own way could understand. They sat in silence again, the weight of their shared loss pressing down on them, creating a bond they hadn't realized existed. And then, without thinking, Adrian reached out, his hand resting on Julian's, a small, simple gesture that spoke volumes. Julian's fingers tightened around his, a silent acknowledgement of the pain they both carried, and they stayed like that, hand in hand, sharing in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. As the afternoon light shifted, casting warm hues across the room, Adrian felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. Julian's hand in his felt grounding, like an anchor holding him steady in the storm of his emotions. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, a part of him wondering if James would have understood this silent connection, this need to find solace in the person who had known him best. "I feel like I don't know who I am without him," Adrian admitted softly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "We were together for so long, and now I just feel lost." Julian's thumb brushed gently over his knuckles, a soothing gesture that sent a shiver down Adrian's spine. "I know," he murmured, his voice steady. "It's the same for me. He was like a brother to me. And now, I feel like there's this void, this empty space that I don't know how to fill." They sat there, holding on to each other in the quiet sanctuary of shared grief, finding comfort in their mutual pain. Adrian felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in his chest, a strange mix of sorrow and solace. It was as if Julian's presence was a balm for the ache that had settled in his heart, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. As the light outside began to fade, casting shadows across the room, Adrian's hand remained clasped in Julian's, neither of them willing to let go. And in that moment, they both knew that something had shifted between them, something that would change the course of their grief and perhaps their lives. They remained on the couch, side by side, their hands still clasped, the silence between them no longer awkward but filled with a strange sense of unity. As the evening deepened, shadows played across Julian's face, accentuating the lines of sorrow etched there. Adrian realized he had never truly seen Julian this close, had never noticed the subtle vulnerability in his gaze or the way his shoulders seemed to carry a weight that mirrored his own. "It's strange," Julian said after a while, his voice barely above a whisper. "Being here without him. I keep expecting to hear his voice, to see him walk in, cracking some joke to break the tension." He let out a soft, bittersweet laugh. He had a way of making everything feel lighter. Adrian nodded, a pang of nostalgia washing over him. "Yeah, he hated seeing people sad. Always knew how to make me laugh, even when I didn't want to." He felt his eyes prick with tears, but he blinked them away, squeezing Julian's hand a bit tighter. "It's just so hard to imagine life without him." Julian's hand trembled slightly in his grasp, and Adrian glanced over, noticing the way Julian's eyes seemed to glisten in the dim light. In that moment, they both understood that they were holding on to more than just each other. They were clinging to the memory of James, to the echoes of his laughter, to the fragments of his presence that still lingered in every corner of the house. Before he realized it, Adrian's free hand lifted, almost instinctively, brushing a stray tear from Julian's cheek. Julian's gaze met his, and for a fleeting second the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the fragile stillness of the moment. His hand lingered on Julian's cheek, the warmth of his skin grounding and comforting, a silent affirmation that neither of them was truly alone in their grief. Julian leaned into the touch, his eyes closing briefly as he let out a shuddering breath. When he opened them again, there was a vulnerability there, a rawness that made Adrian's heart clench. "I didn't think I'd be able to talk to anyone about this," he murmured, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. "But with you, it feels like I don't have to hold it all in." Adrian felt his own composure waver, a tear slipping down his cheek as he took in Julian's words. "I feel the same," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "It's like being with you brings back memories of him, but it also makes it bearable somehow." They sat in that unspoken understanding, their faces close enough that Adrian could feel Julian's breath warm against his skin. The proximity was both comforting and charged, a tender intimacy born from shared pain. For a moment, neither of them moved, each lost in the depth of the other's gaze, as if searching for answers to questions they hadn't yet dared to ask. Finally, Julian broke the silence, his voice barely audible. "Adrian, do you think he would have wanted us to be this way? To lean on each other like this?" Adrian hesitated, a small part of him wondering the same. But as he looked at Julian, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. "James would have wanted us to find peace," he murmured, his hand still resting gently on Julian's cheek. "He wouldn't want us to suffer alone." Julian's gaze softened and he nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're right. He always wanted the best for both of us." In that instant, something shifted, a shared understanding, a quiet acceptance of the connection that had formed between them. It wasn't something they had planned or expected, but it was undeniable, as real and tangible as the warmth of their joined hands. And as they sat there, holding on to each other in the fading light, they both knew that their paths had intertwined in a way neither of them could have foreseen. Without thinking, Adrian leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against Julian's, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. It was a simple gesture, but it held a world of meaning, an acknowledgement of the pain they shared, a promise of companionship through the darkness. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's presence, feeling the weight of their grief gradually ease. And though the sorrow remained, a new warmth blossomed between them, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find solace in each other. As night fell, casting shadows over the room, neither of them pulled away. They held on to each other, anchored by the unspoken connection they had discovered, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The hours drifted by, and neither Adrian nor Julian seemed willing to break the quiet bond that had formed between them. They remained close, their breaths synchronized in the stillness of the room. For the first time since James's passing, Adrian felt a strange sense of peace, as if the weight he'd been carrying had lightened, shared with someone who truly understood. Julian shifted slightly, and their eyes met once more. There was something in his gaze, an unspoken question that Adrian felt as much as saw. It was as though they were both teetering on the edge of something, unsure but undeniably drawn forward. Julian's hand reached up, fingers brushing against Adrian's cheek, a delicate touch that sent a shiver down his spine. "You know," Julian murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I didn't expect to feel this way, to feel connected like this." Adrian swallowed, nodding. "I know what you mean. It feels wrong to feel close to anyone, especially like this, but at the same time it feels like maybe this is exactly what I need." Their faces were inches apart now, the closeness filling Adrian's chest with a warmth that he hadn't felt in what felt like ages. It was a warmth that scared him, yet one he couldn't bring himself to pull away from. His eyes flickered to Julian's lips, and for a moment he allowed himself to wonder what it might feel like to cross that line, to let himself feel something, even if it was complicated, even if it was tangled with guilt and grief. Julian's hand lingered on his cheek, his thumb brushing over Adrian's skin in a gentle, grounding way. "I think James would have understood," Julian whispered as if reading Adrian's thoughts. "He would have wanted us to be okay, even if it meant finding comfort in each other." Adrian's breath hitched, the weight of Julian's words settling over him. Maybe it was true. Maybe James would have understood. After all, he'd always had a way of seeing the best in people, of knowing what they needed before they did. The thought brought a sense of calm, as if James's memory was there with them, giving them silent permission. Without another word, Adrian leaned in, his lips brushing softly against Julian's. It was a tentative, almost reverent kiss, filled with the weight of everything they had been holding back. Julian's hand slid to the back of Adrian's neck, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened, a shared understanding passing between them that words could never capture. In that moment, the world outside faded away, leaving only the warmth of Julian's embrace, the taste of his lips, the way his touch seemed to soothe the ache in Adrian's heart. It was both overwhelming and grounding, a rush of emotions that felt like a balm for the wounds they both carried. When they finally pulled back, their breaths mingling in the quiet room, Adrian felt a strange, dizzying sense of relief wash over him. Julian's gaze held his, and in it, Adrian saw a mirror of his own emotions, a mixture of longing, confusion, and an undeniable connection that had taken root between them. I don't know what this means," Adrian said softly, his voice trembling. "But I don't want to let it go." Julian's fingers tightened around his, a reassuring squeeze. "Neither do I," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Whatever this is, We can figure it out together." They held each other in the quiet aftermath, allowing the depth of the moment to settle over them. It was a beginning, a fragile, uncertain step into something that felt both healing and terrifying. But as they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Adrian knew one thing for certain. He was no longer alone. They would face the uncertainty, the guilt, the lingering grief, side by side, whatever that journey might bring. And for the first time since losing James, he felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, through this connection, they could find a path forward, not by erasing the past, but by honoring it together. The night grew quiet again, filled only with the soft sounds of their breathing and the distant hum of the city outside. They remained close, neither willing to break the contact that had been established, as if letting go would unravel everything they had just found. Adrian rested his head on Julian's shoulder, finding solace in the steady rise and fall of Julian's chest beneath him. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Adrian murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's like I've been wandering around in the dark for so long. And now, here you are." Julian's hand moved to rest gently on Adrian's back, his thumb tracing slow, calming circles. "I feel the same," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent so long trying to convince myself I was fine, that losing James was just something I had to push through to put behind me. But seeing you, it brought everything back, but in a way I didn't expect." Adrian shifted to look at him, taking in the lines of Julian's face, the way his gaze softened, vulnerable yet open. "We've both been holding it in for so long," Adrian whispered. "Maybe it's time to stop pretending, to let ourselves feel everything we've been avoiding." Julian's gaze flickered, an unreadable expression crossing his face before he nodded, his hand coming up to gently cup Adrian's cheek. "You're right. No more pretending." His thumb brushed against Adrian's skin, a soft, grounding touch that sent a shiver through him. "We can take it slow, figure this out together. There's no rush." Adrian felt his heart swell with gratitude. Julian's words were like a balm, offering him the space and understanding he hadn't known he needed. He leaned into Julian's touch, closing his eyes as he allowed himself to fully feel the weight of the connection between them, the shared grief, the unresolved pain, but also the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find healing together. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in a comfortable silence, each of them finding solace in the other's presence. As the night deepened, Adrian's thoughts drifted to memories of James, to the moments they had shared in this very house, to the way James had filled every room with his laughter, his energy, his light. And now, somehow, in a way that felt both surprising and right, it was Julian who filled that space beside him. "Do you ever think about him?" Adrian asked softly, his voice tinged with a quiet vulnerability. Julian's hand stilled for a moment before he nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Every day," he replied, his voice filled with a warmth that held both sadness and gratitude. "James was... he was my closest friend. He knew me better than anyone else." He paused, his gaze turning distant as if lost in a memory. "But now, I think he'd want us to find happiness, to find peace, even if it means finding it in each other." Adrian felt a pang of sadness at the thought, but it was tempered by the comfort of Julian's presence. "I like to think he'd understand," he murmured, his fingers brushing over Julian's. "He always wanted the best for us. He would have wanted us to move forward, even if it meant stepping into something new." Their hands intertwined once more, and as they sat in the quiet of the early morning hours, the weight of their shared past and the possibility of a future together settled between them. It wasn't easy, it wasn't simple, but it was real, and it was theirs. Eventually, Julian leaned forward, his forehead resting against Adrian's, their breaths mingling in the intimate space between them. The moment was filled with a quiet, tentative hope, a new beginning woven from the threads of shared pain and unexpected connection. As dawn approached, casting a soft glow through the windows, they sat together, wordlessly acknowledging the complexity of what they had found. It was uncharted territory, a path lined with memories and grief, but also with the promise of healing. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, side by side. And for the first time since losing James, Adrian felt a quiet peace settle over him, a gentle reassurance that he wasn't alone, that he had found someone who understood, who cared, and who would be there to walk this uncertain road with him.